right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Monte Poker episode 33. We went MIA for 2 weeks, but don't worry, we were working the whole time. If you were here the last couple weeks, you know that I've been working on trying to compile all the footage from the last 2 months. Finally got through all of it and compiled it into a subset of vlogs. I'll give you a sneak peek real quick. These are my vlog folders. Already posted 31 and 32. I've completed doing the overlays for 33 and 34, currently working on voiceovers, and then I'll have 8 more vlogs to work on. The last session I have recorded is from the end of September. We have 0 cash games played in the month of October because we're catching up on old footage. But now that we've done the preliminary work, we can rapid fire a bunch of these videos and get a couple uploaded a week. Starting Thursday, November 7th, I will be back at Outlaws playing cash regularly at least once a week. If any of you want to meet up and have a chance of making it on the vlog, please stop by. Thank you for sitting through that long update. Let's jump into the poker. We start the session buying in for $300. We got here pretty late in the night, so there's a second table going, which is why the angle is a bit different from what you guys are used to seeing. We're not on the main game, we're in the feeder game trying to get into the main game. We came pretty late, it's about 8 p.m, so I don't plan on staying too long, especially since we just got done with a lake trip. Anyhow, jumping into the action, we look down at pocket fours, facing a small raise from Miss Margot, who is in middle position. She bumps it up to 15 bucks and we put in the call here in the small blind with our pocket pair. The end of the gun player decides to come along for that price. The flop ends up coming out 3, 4, 5 with 2 spades. The player after me decides to act out of position and check. I let him know that it's my turn to act and decide to bet out $15 here. He calls the $15. The action gets back over to Margot, who decides to go all in for her remaining stack, which isn't too much more than our bet. Her all in is $48, so we're obviously going to put in the call here. And this is where we run into a pretty interesting spot. The other player in the hand decides to add 100 on top. At this point, this board is very wet. There's already a potential straight out there with ace deuce, but there's plenty of other hands like 5-6 or potentially an ace 6 with 2 spades. A lot of potential 2 pairs as well, like 4-5, 3-4, or even 2 other sets like pocket 3s or pocket 5s. Beating a lot of those hands, but we're also losing to a couple of them, although we aren't drawing dead even if our opponent already has a made straight. If I call the 100 here, only gonna have about 150 to 160 left behind, so there's no point in just calling. If we're gonna play here, we're gonna play for all of it, so I decide to go all in. Our opponent snaps us off, which isn't great news, and he does in fact have the nuts. A lot of trouble and needs some help here. The deuce of clubs on the turn is not the card that we needed. The red 5 on the river is indeed. The board pairs and we hit our full house, and Margot flips over pocket 9s. And to make matters even better, not only did we win this hand, but while we were at the start of the hand, we got called over to the main game, so we picked up a good amount of chips to take over to the bigger table, and my gosh, are we going to need them. Eric is sitting on a monster stack, and you know what we like to do. Me and Eric love to get into it and play for all of it. About an hour goes by before we look down at anything interesting, and we pick up ace king offsuit in the small blind. There's an open to $15, and then the action folds over to the button, who decides to raise at 35. I'm okay with the re-raise here, but considering there's not too many players already involved in the hand besides Eric, I do just decide to flat 35 here. The big blind gets out of the way, Eric puts in the call, so we go 3 ways to this flop. 138 in the middle, and the board comes out a dream. King, king, 10, rainbow. No reason to lead out here on this board. We flopped trips with the best kicker possible. I check, the action gets over to Eric. He checks it as well. Gets back to the button. He decides to continue here for $80. We put in the call pretty quickly. Eric thinks it over for quite some time, but does eventually put in the fold. 298. As we go to this turn, there comes a 3 of diamonds. I think checking here is okay, but I'm really worried about the button potentially checking it back. If he has any sort of straight draw that he was betting on the flop, I doubt he's going to go anywhere on this turn. So I decide to lead out here for a half pot size bet for $150. It's a little bit too much for an open ender to call. They don't have the right pot odds, but it's still not a terrible amount. It would be 150 for them to call to make about 600. 600, but our opponent does eventually put in the fold, so we're going to take down this pot here. Always feels good to start a vlog with a couple of wins. Shortly after that hand, we end up scooping 2 small pots. The first one, we played ace deuce offsuit in the blinds, ended up hitting 2 pair. The very next hand, a few minutes later, pick up jack 7 suited, end up turning a flush and scooping another small pot. There wasn't really anything to analyze, but I thought they'd be worth including because they did change the size of our stack in a significant way. But this next hand is worth breaking down. My boy Jose and Anthony rarely let us down in these bomb pots, so I always make sure to tip them before we get our hands dealt for some extra run good. This time is no exception. We look down at 10, 8, 6, 5 with 2 hearts, and the board comes out 9, jack, queen, rainbow. We flop the straight, but it is not the nut straight, and there are no flush draws available on this board. Our good friend Karen is on the big blind, and she's typically on the tighter side, so when she bets $50 onto this board here, I do not like this situation whatsoever. I'm sitting here going back and forth, telling myself to be a good PLO player and to not be calling with the bottom end of the straight because somebody definitely has king 10 here and has us beat, especially with so many players left to act. But I already told myself that my man in the box is not going to let us down. We gave him that dollar before the hand got dealt, so we have to win, otherwise the bribe is no good. So I end up just capping it here, putting all the money in the middle, and to my surprise, a bunch of players call behind. There's no way every single person here has king 10, but there's probably at least 1 or 2 sets out there. Need to fade a lot on this run out here. 440 in the middle, and we go to the run out, which comes a deuce of diamonds and a 4 of spades. Relatively safe as long as nobody has a higher straight. Karen flips over pocket jacks, but doesn't show her other 2 cards, so this leads me to believe that we're good here. Nobody really seems to want to show their hand, so it feels like I'm good. Eventually one of the villains exposes an 8 of hearts, and Eric flips over ace 10 queen 6 with 2 diamonds. We ended up taking this pot down, but I do not think this is a good call in the long run. But if you do end up tipping your dealer before the hand starts, you can't just fold when you flop the straight. So moral of the story is hook your dealers up and they'll reward your donkey plays. Moving on. For this next hand, we look down at ace deuce of clubs in middle position. That was a $15 raise pre-flop and 4 of us going to this flop, $60 in the middle, and the board runs out deuce deuce 5 with 2 diamonds. The action is over on our boy Eric, and he very quickly puts in a bet sizing of $30. This is a half pot size bet. The player in between us decides to call the $30, and when the action gets back to me, I'm thinking that I could raise here, but we have so much of this board locked up, I don't really think there's any point to, so I just put in the $30 call here. Player after us gets out of the way, so we go off to this turn with $150 in the middle. Turn comes a king of spades, which is absolutely phenomenal for our hand. No cards that complete the straight, no diamonds to complete the flush. Eric takes a couple of seconds to think it over and decides to put a bet out there of $100. Player in between us says that's too much and puts his cards in the middle. When the action gets back over to me, I think this is a great card for us to raise now. If our opponent was bluffing with a hand like ace king, he just hit a pair. And if Eric was just leading out with the flush draw, we're going to charge him to try and make the maximum here. Dealer takes 100 from both of us, so there's now 350 in the middle, and it's $200 more here for Eric to put in the call. Fortunately, he does not do so, so we end up taking this one down. We missed the peel back on the cards, but we looked down at pocket aces. I had raised to $10 and we got 2 callers in between, and then we see a re-raise to $25. Since there's already money in the middle and our opponent is trying to tell us they have a strong hand, I decide to re-raise here and make it $60 to go. This bet sizing isn't intended to make either of the 2 players fold, but instead just get more money in the middle. My boy Kev Dog puts in the call, and then the re-raiser decides to put in the call as well. We're going 3 ways to this flop, 183 in the middle. The board comes out queen 10 deuce rainbow. This is a pretty good board for me. One of our opponents is likely to have caught a piece of it, and unless they have queen 10, we should be ahead of them a lot of the time. I decided to continue here for $90. It's about a half pot size bet. Our boy Kev Dog puts in the call. The pre-flop re-raiser decides to fold here. Kevin didn't leave himself that much behind. I'm honestly surprised he didn't just go all in. So before the turn comes out, I decided to just put the rest of it in because I'm not going to fold for what he has left regardless of the turn card here. 5 of hearts comes on the turn. Kevin decides to put it in.
Once or twice?
Whatever you want.
Go twice.
Yeah. I think you have me. I have aces. Queens?
Second one.
Oh, there you go. Oh, yeah, you can't go anywhere.
Kevin had an open-ended straight draw with the flush draw, so obviously he was going nowhere after that turn there. He asked if we could run it twice, and I was happy to oblige. Of course, we would have won if we had just run it once, but overall, I think running it twice is okay. Decreases the variance, and if we're ahead, we have the same percentage on both boards. So at this point, we had an absolutely crazy sun run. We've made a ton of money off of a really small buy-in, as you can clearly see by the chips that are filling up the screen. At this point, Margot's on her second or third bullet. We're also really tired from being at the lake all day. You can tell she's getting irritable and it's time to go soon. So I start loading up the chips, getting ready to go, but not before we finish this last hand. I end up taking a stab with my deuces at this flop here, hoping that our single pair is good. The turn gives us an open ender, but since we're already on our way out, I'm not trying to play a big pot here. They're good, and if they're not, they're not. But they do in fact end up being good. And with that, we end this first session, but don't go anywhere because there's plenty of poker to be shown. But we can't end this first session without the cash out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this next clip is from the following session happening on August 2nd. We started the session, I think, around 6 o'clock. There was a good amount of money on the table, so we bought in for more than our usual amount. Looks like we bought in for around $700 here. And the first hand of the session starts with a PLO Bomb Pot. Nothing too crazy here. We were playing 6-handed, so I decided to lead out on a board with bottom 2 pair. We end up turning 3 pair and putting in the rest of it, hoping that we're ahead of our opponents here because there aren't any completed straights or flushes, and we end up getting it through without having to get to showdown. Pretty straightforward, but always like to include the first win on the vlog, and with that we jump into the second hand. This one's going to be another pretty quick one because it is another PLO Bomb Pot. Once again, for the newer people, at Dealer Change here at Outlaws, they do PLO Bomb Pots that are capped to $100, so the maximum any given player can bet is 100. 10 of it goes in pre-flop and everybody's involved. We have King 5 10 4 with 2 spades. We end up flopping 2 pair, but we also have a King high flush draw to go with it. So we can hit any spade for the flush, we can hit either a 10 or a 4 for a full house, and I guess we also do have a backdoor straight draw holding the 5. We're also blocking 2 potential sets here, so this is looking like a pretty good board for us overall. We have a player betting the maximum, another player calling in between. The action gets back over to us, so I put in the call here, which closes the action. 350 in the middle, and we go to this run out. The 3 of hearts on the turn doesn't really help us, and then the king of clubs on the river definitely does not help us. One of our opponent shows 2 3s, so he turned quads. I could not catch the rest of the cards he threw down from this far on the table, unfortunately, so we don't know what the other 2 cards he had were, but really don't need to know anything more beyond that. This next hand, we looked down at King 9 suited on the hijack. There was an $18 open by the under the gun player. The action folded to us. I decided to put in the call here since we do have position and nobody else behind us seemed to be interested in their whole cards. $40 in the middle going heads up to this board, which comes out Jack Deuce 4 with 2 hearts. Pretty good flop for us. We flop the King high flush draw and we have an over to the board. Our opponent continues here for $20 and we very quickly put in the call. $80 in the middle, and the 5 of clubs comes on the turn. Doesn't really change anything for us. Our opponent checks. I'm just going to go ahead and check it back here, take our free river card, hope to hit. River brings a 6 of spades, and unfortunately we do not hit, but our opponent gives us an opportunity here. He checks it over to us a second time, so I take a stab at this with a $60 bet. Our opponent quickly calls, not sure if he was trapping or worried about 4 to the straight being on the board, so he went into check call mode, or if he figured I would take a stab at this with the mace flush draw. Either way, he snapped us off on the river. His pocket queens were obviously good. I think if I wanted to start bluffing at this pot, I probably should have started on the turn and not the river. Probably would have looked a little bit more credible, but after we checked back the turn, I think we just looked too weak. Either way, our stack is looking a bit short after this hand, so we added on for some more chips here, another 500 to be exact, and then we hop right back into it. About an hour goes by and we look down at pocket aces in the low jack. The under the gun player limped, player after him put in the full fold. I bump it up to 15. Old man Joe calls, the blinds get out of the way, and the under the gun player calls the additional $12 here. Going three ways to this flop with $49 in the middle. The board runs out 8-4-5 rainbow. Overall, a pretty safe board for us, but the board is slightly connected, so I do decide to bet $20 here. Old man Joe gets out of the way. The under the gun player puts in the call, and the 3 of hearts peels off on the turn. Under the gun checks it over to us again. I definitely want to size up here. This board is getting far too connected. Trying to figure out what our opponent has that makes sense. I don't think he's holding an ace X hand because we're double blocking that, and I don't think he would have called the flop with just a gut shot. So I think our opponent is going to have a lot of top pairs here, potentially even a hand like pocket sixes or pocket sevens that is a second pair on the board but still has outs to a straight. I make it 60 to go, and our opponent puts in the call, so we're going heads up to this river. 209 in the middle, and the river brings us a 9 of hearts. I'm not too worried about the heart draw, but I don't like the 9 because, as I mentioned, our opponent could have had a single pair holding, and it's very possible that he had 8-9, but I do prefer this card over a 6 or 7 that would have put 4 to the straight out on the board. Our opponent decides to bet 145. I'm absolutely not folding for this amount. We quickly put in the call. Our opponent announces that he has an 8. I show our aces, and they are good. All right, ladies and gentlemen, big pot incoming. About 15 minutes go by, and we look down at another premium ace queen offsuit. We are in the big blind, so not a fantastic position to be playing this hand, but definitely strong enough to get in there and mix it up. The cutoff makes it $30. The button pretty quickly puts in the call. Small blind comes along for the ride, and we're obviously going nowhere. 120 in the middle, 4 of us going to this flop, and the board comes out queen ace deuce with 2 spades. Small blind checks, and I go ahead and put in the check. Ace high boards are often going to favor the pre-flop aggressor, and even if he doesn't hit, he's often going to take a stab at this regardless. Cutoff bets $30, which is about a quarter of the pot. I'm going to put in a raise here to $75, trying to build this pot up and make sure to charge the flush draws. Our opponent pretty quickly puts in the call, and we go off to this turn, which comes a 4 of spades. Don't necessarily love this card, but we're still holding 2 pairs, so we could boat up on the river. We could also hit another spade to have a queen high flush. So I think it's better for me to continue betting on this card, and 150 is the price to see the river. To my surprise, the opponent puts in the call fairly quickly. It doesn't even seem like he thought about it, to be honest. And then we get an absolute dream card, an ace of clubs. We boat up on the river and have the effective nuts here. I say effective nuts because technically 3-5 of spades is a straight flush and dominating us, but we're not putting our opponent on that hand. I decide to fire here for $225, a little less than half pot, which I'm honestly not too big of a fan of the sizing I used here. I think I should have gone about quarter pot to keep our opponent's weaker hands in, or just gone for a full pot size bet, making it look like we were bluffing and trying to steal it. Either way, our opponent folds, still win a $570 pot, so I'm not complaining. This next hand won't require much of a breakdown. We flop a flush draw with a gutter ball, end up putting a bet on this flop, which very quickly gets capped. Multiple players call the capped bet. The action is back on me, and one of our opponents ends up flipping his cards over before I had decided and put the money in. I tell him it doesn't really matter what he has. I'm still going to put in the call here because we have a straight and flush draw. Fortunately, I did end up seeing that he had 2 diamonds himself with a king of diamonds, so obviously some of our opponents are holding our outs, which we were already expecting. That's often going to be the case in these PLO bomb pots. 7 of spades on the turn doesn't really help. 6 of hearts on the river is in fact what we needed, but now there's a higher straight available, and when we get to showdown, we do see that somebody does in fact have a higher straight. Even if the 7 hadn't come out, it looks like we would have lost anyway because our opponent was holding a 7 along with a 9. He also had a straight and flush draw. Another 15 minutes go by, and we look down at pocket forwards on the button. There's a few limpers going to this flop here, and for some reason I decided to limp as well. I'm not sure why. Typically in this position with any pocket pair, if I'm going to see a flop, it's usually worth throwing 10 or 15 bucks into the pot, but I digress. Luckily, the big blind did decide to put in a raise for us. They made the price of poker 18 to go, and we go 3 ways to this flop with $60 in the middle. The board comes out 7-4-9 with 2 clubs. The initial raiser checks it over to the player in the middle. He checks it as well. The action gets back to me here, and with the set, we're definitely going to continue betting here. here. I try to keep it small and make it $20 to go. Big blind quickly folds, but the hijack doesn't go anywhere. Go off to this turn with 100 in the middle. 3 of clubs peels off. Not a card we wanted to see. To make things even worse, the hijack ends up going all in for his remaining stack. Dealer gets a count and it's $65 more. I'm pretty sure he hit the flush here, but unfortunately I can't fold the set for this amount. So we do flick in a call, 230 in the middle, going to this river, which is a phenomenal 7 of spades, now pairing the board. We have our full house, our opponent mucks face down, so we never find out what he has here. Probably should have let him show for the sake of the vlog, but once again, I am not ever interested in making opponents show the loser if they don't want to. Moving on to the next one. The next hand of interest brings us Queen 10 suited in the low jack. There's an open to $10, and we pretty quickly put in a call here. Can argue to make a raise as well to 25-ish or so, trying to not get any of the players behind us making the call as well. But with a hand here that has potential to make straights and flushes, I'm very okay just putting in the call. 51 in the middle, going to this flop, which comes out 9 queen queen with 2 diamonds. Absolutely fantastic flop for our hand. We flop trips, and there's got to be somebody that caught a piece of this board. So I put in a small bet here of $15 into 51. The big blind puts in the call, but everybody else folded, and we go heads up to this turn, which brings the 8 of clubs. So if our opponent was on an open-ended straight draw with Jack 10, he just got there, but he checks it over to us pretty quickly. So I'm going to continue here for a sizable bet and make it $60 to go, and our opponent very quickly puts in the call. We get to this river with 201 in the middle, a 4 of clubs. Our opponent checks it over to us, and when the action is on me, I think it over for a while, and I don't think we're gonna get called by worse here. I have a really bad feeling that we're beat. Board run out was a bit sketchy, and our opponent doesn't seem to be scared. I end up checking this back. Our opponent shows ace queen offsuit. I flip over my queen 10, and obviously our opponent is good. If I had known he had this hand, I definitely would have fired at the river, but it's hard to put somebody else on the last queen in the deck. Thought it was far more likely that he had either a straight or flush draw, but let me know what you guys would have done in the comment section. Take another hit to our stack a bit later, getting mixed up in a PLO Bomb Pot with just 2 pair, which I do not advise. And we did end up losing this one, obviously. Big shocker there. For this next one, I get a bit out of line. The action limps over to me, so I decide to open to $12 with 6-5 offsuit. We had 2 callers, and we go to this board 3 ways, which comes out 6 deuce 3 rainbow. So we have top pair, which is phenomenal for this hand. I continue here for $20, and the button puts in the call. Hijack gets out of the way, so we go heads up to this turn card here with 79 in the middle, and the deuce of hearts peels off. Changes absolutely nothing on this board for me. We still have top pair, and I expect it to be good here. I'm putting our opponent on some sort of straight draw, maybe like an ace 4 or ace 5 holding. Continue betting here for $55, expecting to get our opponent off of any sort of draw, but that does not seem to be the case. She still wants to tango, so she lines up some chips, takes another quick peek at her hand, and then puts them over the line. 189 now in the middle, going to this river card, praying for a clean run out. The 10 of clubs is a brick for all intents and purposes on this board, so I decide to quickly fire here for $100. Our opponent folds, and we are good to go. For this last hand, we're going to just throw up some b-roll of the last PLO Bomb Pot that we played before we headed out for the night. I'll cover the first and second sessions just so we can go over the profits and losses. For the first session, we bought in for 300, cashed out for 1450, which brings us to a total profit of 1150. This was a 2.5 hour long session, so obviously the hourly profit is going to be absolutely massive, but it's a really small sample size, but a fantastic session nonetheless. For the second session, we bought in for a good amount and then had to reload halfway through, so we were in for a total of 1100, out for 1350, so a total profit of 250. This one was over the course of a little over 6 hours, bringing our hourly profit to around 40 bucks an hour or 13 big blinds an hour, which is a lot more typical and reasonable. And that's about it for these 2 sessions. Getting back to this closing PLO Bomb Pot here. This was a very interesting situation where we flopped 2 pair and it checked all the way down to the river. There's not a ton of money in this pot, so when we got to the river, our opponent bet here for about $20 and I instantly capped it to 90. He ends up going into the tank for quite a while here, a couple of minutes in fact, but does ultimately elect to call. Announce that we have a full house. He says it's good and that he turned the flush. And with this last scoop, this is one of the pots that put us back into the green for the day. And with that, it is time for me to let you guys go. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out the video. Thank you guys for your patience as well in regards to the videos not coming out as often as they should have been. We're going to get back to our normal schedule soon once we're done hiring an editor and getting them all trained up on pushing out videos. And like I said, we are trying to get up to date with the vlog catching up to current hands, so it's only about a week or two behind. Make sure to comment, like, and subscribe if you haven't already. It really goes a long way with the algorithm, and I will catch you guys next time.